Have you ever wondered what makes creative people tick? Where do their ideas come from? What keeps them energized? What kinds of things get in their way? Is their life as much fun as it looks from the outside? Hello, I'm your host, Lily Pierpont, and this is ArtStorming, a podcast about how ideas become paintings or poems, performances, or collections. Each episode, I'll chat with a guest from the arts community, and we'll explore how the most creative among us stare down a blank canvas or reach into the void and create something new. Today, I'll be ArtStorming with Jenny Day. The question that comes to mind when I think of Jenny is there anything this woman can't do? She oozes creative maker out of every pore of her being. I caught up with her in her studio on a day that she was in the midst of preparing for a massive museum show. When I saw the scale of what she was involved with, I was amazed that she was taking the time to talk to me. But that's just how Jenny rolls. In this conversation, we'll talk about how she manages the stress of it all, though I see no evidence of stress. Somehow, she's figured out how to metabolize the creative energy that just floods through her. She's like an octopus with arms extending gracefully into so many pots, and yet she doesn't seem frenetic at all. She's soft-spoken with an easy laugh, and she just makes it look all so totally effortless and fun. All right, I'm here in Jenny Day's most extraordinary studio, which consists of about 4 different layers of 4 different studios with sewing machines in one area. And right now I'm up amongst all this wool, huge skeins of wool, and what is spread out and a huge rug in the making. And Jenny's preparing for a show, and I'm going to just start there because you are creating a show that consists of, describe it a little bit.
Sure. So it's, again, this show is going to be at Alabama Contemporary in Mobile, Alabama. And the working title so far is called A Feast to Remember. And it will be like a celebration that's maybe gone awry or has been paused and the animals are taking over. And usually I make, in the past, I've only made paintings and sculptures, and paintings would be on the wall and sculptures on pedestals. But this show, it's like an event that's happening that you're stepping into. And so there's actually going to be events that go along with it. So there's going to hopefully be like a dinner party, and we're also talking about people making, having workshops where they make costumes and then dress up and come to the party. So we'll see.
It's going to be amazing. So what we saw downstairs when I first came in is you've found a table in Albuquerque that you've painted a matte pink.
Yep.
On it is table settings with including hand-embroidered placemats and napkins. You're working on a table runner. You've also made these enormous ceramic sculptures, a huge turtle that's going to go under the table.
Yeah.
And then the crocodile or the alligator is going...
He's going to be... Yeah, he'll be on top. Well, we'll see how it goes when I set everything up. But there's going to be big, large-scale ceramic animals, and then there's also beaded animals, and a big beaded chandelier. And there'll be... I haven't made it yet, but I'm doing a residency right before the show where I'll be making ceramic food. So there'll be like a big feast made out of ceramics and then beaded objects.
So there really won't be room for any food on this table per se, but I can see another companion table where, mimicking what you've done already in jewels and beads and ceramics, and there's also a bear with a baby riding on it. I mean, it's the most extraordinary and intricate thing I've ever seen, ever. And these 3 layers. So how on earth did you come up with this idea?
Well, I think, for one, before the show, I was making... Well, let me start over. So I think I talked to you earlier, but we talked about how I started in painting, and it was like abstracted landscapes. And then before that, I was painting the figure, but I went to grad school and I kind of eliminated the figure from my work, made big abstracted landscape paintings. And then they had to do with climate change and environmental degradation. And then it kind of evolved over time. especially during COVID, where I think I had a bunch of shows in a row that nobody saw. And I think the concern and worry I was having, I felt like a lot of people I think felt this way, but during the pandemic, I suddenly felt like all these concerns I had that I'd been reading about were even more worrisome. And my paintings shifted to start having animals in them. And there was a lot of fire and chaos and big, like, looming celebration.
We're going to be hearing a dog, so that's just going to be part of the day here today.
Yeah, that's Willow, the greyhound. But I can close the window if you need me to.
That's all right.
Okay, and so those, like, big leaping animals with fire started happening. Oh, gosh. There might be somebody here.
Hold on one second. Okay, so that commotion that we just experienced was because outside of these beautiful plate glass windows that overlook an amazing landscape, Santa Fe landscape, there was a hawk with a snake in its mouth, and the dogs went berserk, and they came inside, and we've all had a nice little meet and greet now. But it's really a perfect segue into the description of the show, which is not just a perfectly statically laid table with fruits and animals, but the animals are going to be tearing this setting apart.
Right.
So that must be something that you see a lot in the wild, animals just kind of taking apart civilization. But say more about your expression of that.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess I was thinking about, like, the evolution of the painting and those looming celebratory animals leaping out of these environments, and you don't know if they're fleeing or they're, ecstatic or something. And in that time period, I also started having, like, I run a lot with the dogs.
Okay, we're back.
Okay.
One of the ways
I get ideas often happens when I'm running. And after I'm running for a long time, I'll start having, like, solving problems in my art or having, like, kind of visions of paintings. And so one of the runs I had in the last couple of years, I had this vision of this feast. And I think it was an evolution of these paintings where there's these animals. And I've also been making ceramic sculptures that have had animals, but it's just, they weren't necessarily connected into an experience. And so I think that's part of it. But there's also, a lot of things I've seen. A lot of people have brought up the dinner party, but I've known about that forever.
You mean Judy Chicago's dinner party? Yeah.
And I've known about that forever. Definitely wasn't thinking about that, but it's in the back of my mind. And recently, in the last couple of months, I was able to see it in person, which was interesting. I think what I'm thinking of making is definitely not as, like, that seems really pristine, and this is going to be a lot more chaotic. And it's more like something that was abandoned and ruined, or maybe celebrated, and thinking of biophilia taking over. And I would say in that way, like, the biophilia taking over idea, that's something that's been present in my work for a really long time. So it's just on a larger scale.
Mm-hmm. And is this the first sort of immersive piece that you've done?
Yeah.
Okay. And so you started, which was your first art form, or did you develop painting was first?
Yeah, I went to school for painting. Before that, I went to school for environmental science and graduated. And then I went to UC Santa Cruz, did environmental science, graduated, lived in Maine, and was in an art collective, and worked a bunch of odd jobs, and, like, lived out of my truck, and was just in all these artist communities. And I realized that I really, like, I was apprenticing with different people, making baskets, just making anything that I could find, and anybody that I could work with. And I realized I wanted to go to school again, that I needed to be in an environment where I could be critiqued and learn a bunch at once. So I went to school and got a BFA at night in Fairbanks, Alaska. And
wait a minute. So you were in Maine and then you got to Fairbanks, Alaska?
I did.
Just fill in the gaps a little bit.
So I had some friends that invited me to live there in Fairbanks. I was living in Maine, and I, at the time, really wanted, I had an old truck, and let me see if I can let her in. Usually they're not.
Okay, so you were telling me that I asked you how you got from Maine to Alaska.
Yeah, so I was like working all these different jobs, living in and out of my truck, doing work trade, and I kind of figured out like I couldn't afford land there ever unless I had most of the people I knew that had land there had inherited it, and I was living right like in a beautiful area right by the ocean, and I also really needed more education than what I had. I was working on farms, and I had some friends that lived in Alaska, and I just at the time was like, I want to live somewhere where I can buy land, and I want a dog. And I wanted it to feel more wild than Maine. And I originally came from California and had spent a lot of time in remote areas. And so I had friends that lived there, and they were like, just come up, and there's a school in our town, just go take some art classes. We'll connect you in this community. We'll give you a dog. And so I moved there and went to school, and really loved it. So that was a big shift. And I went to school at night and got a BFA and was a horticulturist in the day. And I was a landscape supervisor at the university there. And so I had some big greenhouses I ran. And I really had this time where it was hard for me to connect like what I cared about in the world with my art. And I felt like I had these two separate selves. And so there was like what I made at night at art school, and then there was my day job. It was about like the environment and plants and horticulture. And
you were equally impassioned about both.
And I applied to grad school, and I was thinking I was either going to be like a botanist or I'd get my MFA. And the MFA just won out. And so I ended up going to school in Tucson, Arizona for painting. And so...
And how did you settle on Tucson?
I was looking for... Well, one, I really needed to be in the sun, so I didn't think I was...
After Alaska and Maine, I would think so.
So I didn't realize... I lived in Alaska for about 7 years, and I didn't realize that it mattered, but I was born in California, and a lot of people don't do well with... Like, where I lived, there was times where there was only 4 hours of dusk and for the winter, and my vitamin D levels became super negative. And it was just recommend. They were like, you need to go live in the sun. You're not doing well. And this happens to some people. Or, you can like take lots of drugs if you want to stay here. and we were kind of at a time, Mike, my husband, was a dog musher for about 15 years.
And you met him in Alaska?
I did.
Uh-huh.
And he had decided to make a shift and didn't want to be a dog musher anymore. And I had kind of exhausted my options in Fairbanks. And so this is like such a long, convoluted story, but we ended up taking a year off, living in a van, and traveled and went to almost every state in the United States and looked at art schools. And also figured out, we wanted me actually to be in the sun. And I had a connection to the Sonoran Desert. I'd spent a lot of time there. And he actually grew up there. And so I applied to a bunch of places, and that was one of them. And that they gave me a wonderful deal to go. And I ended up working with a teacher named Dmitry Kozyrev. And he's a Russian painter, really good. And he became my mentor. And so I studied under him and painted for a bunch of years. And so we lived there for a long time, and then we moved here. and we came to Santa Fe because we were looking for something that felt kind of like Alaska. There's a lot of land in New Mexico, and we also were
so the open space.
Yeah, the open space, and
but it still has sun.
Yeah, still has sun. There's tons of open space. It's in the Rockies, and then there's connection to the art scene. So.
Yeah. Well, that was, I mean, you sort of answered one of my questions that I've been asking everybody is why Santa Fe?
Yeah.
At least for this first round of talks that I'm having with people, because I've decided that Santa Fe is more than a location. It's sort of a state of mind. What have you discovered since coming here about Santa Fe beyond just the land and geographic criteria that it met?
Yeah.
Say more about the arts community for you.
Yeah, well, the beginning of the arts community when I was first here, I really had no connection to it. I had a bunch of shows in a row since I've been out of grad school, so for about 10 years. And so I've just been in the studio all the time, which has been fantastic, but also it's kind of hard to like create community if you're just in your room. And so when we first moved here, I kind of made an attempt. Like I took some clay classes and art classes and yoga and stuff like that, just trying to like be in the community. And then, but I still kind of didn't make too many friends or connect to the art community. I'd go to openings, but I wouldn't know anybody. And I really, like, in the last couple of years, especially after COVID again, I was like, I have to like make an effort. Otherwise, this is going to be like my whole life where I don't connect with people and just make work. and that's not really who I am. So in the last couple of years, I just decided, okay, I'm going to just be more open. I'm going to connect with people. When I go to art openings, I'm going to like introduce myself, talk to people. And when I meet people, I'll just say yes. Instead of saying, no, I'm really too busy in the studio, I have a bunch of shows coming up, I'm just going to make the time. And since that happened, I felt like I've made lots of community, and it's been great. And part of it too has been that I started firing my ceramic work with Ralph Scala in Cerrillos.
Who's a local ceramic artist who has a kiln that a lot of local artists use.
Yeah. And so I met him, and then he has been like a hub of people and other artists internationally, local artists. And that actually made me connect with tons of people. And then from there, continuing on. So I feel now like I have a really rich, like diverse community of artists that I can connect with. And that's definitely what I was looking for when I moved here, especially, when I left Tucson, I felt like, lots of people stay in their town after grad school, but I felt like I needed to move somewhere else. Like the school wasn't going to hire me to, I could have maybe taught like as adjunct or something, but it, I created that community as a student, and I really needed to grow past that community and make something of myself as like a professional artist. And
you certainly have no problem, generating new living situations for yourself. So you don't seem to be very shy about that. But I think it's extraordinary that you have this capacity to just plunk yourself down in a new place, especially given how involved your work is. I can see how it would be really easy to get isolated.
Yeah. Yeah, I can get really isolated. But also, I also joined, besides art stuff, like I joined a running group, and I go to the gym. And so just building routines with community in activities that I would do alone, and just being like, okay, I have to do at least one run a week with someone else.
Do you find that feeds your work in a way that isolation doesn't? That seems like an obvious thing, but say about that.
Yeah, I think there's this way that it's easy for me to just get hyper focused and stressed, and I have like this list of stuff I have to produce, and I think that it's better for me to just be working, and that I'll be more productive that way. But I'm seeing that that's really not the case. Like my work has gotten way more expansive as I've been more open to having people in my life. And so, and even, like we had that party, and I was talking with you and a couple other people about this idea I want to make with a boat. And all of you had these suggestions about it, and we're giving like art historical examples, and that, like, just even that kind of conversation is so rewarding and fulfilling. And like I walked away from that was like 3-minute conversation. But I've been thinking about that a lot and feeling like I wouldn't have been able to make all those connections on my own, or if I had, it would have taken so much research, in years. But instead of like having a community, like, and being able to bounce ideas off of them, and people that are artists or like art collectors or not artists at all, that just has been really helpful. And I think before in my life I wasn't ready to be that open. Like, I don't know if I was secure enough as who I was, and like who I was in myself and who I was as an artist. And now I feel, I used to feel like, oh, I have to be a painter. That's what I know. And then when I departed into also making ceramic objects, I felt really uncomfortable. And then I kind of cemented myself in that. Was like, okay, now I make ceramic sculpture and I'm a painter.
Say a little bit more. I want to go a little deeper dive into that, because for people who sort of, we all have, even us, we non-artists, but we get these ideas about ourselves.
Yeah.
And you say, I'm a painter. And then you get a kind of itch to explore something else. Go a little bit more into how you make that transition from, like, how did you decide to go into clay, for example?
Well, clay, I just started feeling, so it's, when I was in Alaska, I started in sculpture, but I just kind of forgot. And I didn't make anything in clay. I made things out of metal and found objects. And I took like jewelry classes and welding classes and blacksmithing classes. And then when I found painting, it was like at the right time. I was having these dreams all the time where I was painting, standing in front of a canvas. And then I started getting to the point where I'd like blink and I'd see myself painting. And which sounds really weird, but I think that's just kind of how, like, I'm pretty visual. And so my brain gets like flooded with images all the time. And I really try to listen to them. And so in finding painting, it was similar with clay. I started constantly thinking about what it would feel like to touch clay. And I don't know why that was. And I had friends that work with clay, and I started talking to them and being like, well, can I come see your studio? And so I started taking, I took a workshop at Santa Fe Clay in the Rail Yard with Lee Atkins, and immediately was like, oh yeah, I just felt this need to touch it. And I had these visions of making these sculptures that were interacted with my paintings. And then the same things happened with all these other things I've incorporated more recently. I used to knit while I was looking at a painting, trying to problem solve it. I'd sit there and like knit these objects with my hands that had nothing to do with painting. It was just, I didn't know what it was about, but
I was thinking with your hands.
Yeah, it was
sounds like
yeah, and I don't do that anymore. But I think there's all these pieces of things that I've always made, and they were always not art, like and I've tried so many other art forms, but I always have made things. And I think in the last couple of years, I just decided, well, anything can be, like, I can use anything. I don't need to.
So say a little bit more about, you just said, making things that were not art. How do you distinguish what's making things that's art and making things that's just making things?
Well, I think because I went to school, it sort of, there was these divisions that accidentally happened. Like, oh, this is craft, this is fine art, this is what I'm learning in art history. The whole chunks of, things that you would learn about ceramics or sculpture, like ceramic sculpture or textiles, like weren't in my art history. Maybe just a little bit, if I learned about the art history of Mexico or something, but it would really be focused on like painting and marble sculpture or something. And so I think it just accidentally happened, and I made this division of what I thought fine art looked like. And for a long time that was painting. Not that one was less, but I would be like, oh, I'm knitting these weird little objects. No one's ever going to see them. I'm hiding them. Like, no way would I let anyone see this. And ceramics in the beginning was like that. I made those and didn't show them to anybody. I was thinking this was a way for me to have something that wasn't serious. Like, the painting started feeling really full of pressure because I started having galleries and museum shows, and all the paintings needed to, be of this certain quality and weight and like art historical significance and
a lot of significance. I'm hearing a lot of significance.
Yeah.
So this was something.
And so like the clay was like, oh, I'm just doing this. No one's ever going to see it. And I'll just like kind of get this out over here and then focus on painting. But then what happened is the clay started informing the painting, and the painting started getting less serious, and the textural, and then all of it just broke wide open to like, I'm going to get out of my own way and start whatever I want to make, I can make. I can just be an artist. I don't need to label myself anymore. And, part of that has been through like my husband is supportive in that. Like he's been like, why do you care? Just make what you need to make. Like you don't.
I almost feel like it would be helpful for so many of us if we could just be called makers instead of artists. There's something really significant, and there's a kind of pressure that comes with artists. And I was talking to somebody else yesterday who's a dancer, and we were talking about the fact that, unless you're on stage and unless you have a certain body type and unless you're just doing a certain type of choreography, one can't call themselves a dancer in much the same way that one can be a maker and making crafts and doing all these things. But, the mantle of artist has a kind of weightiness to it. And it takes a lot of the fun and playfulness out of it. And I'm not saying that anybody who's a maker who makes anything is an artist necessarily.
Right.
And there's a lot of discussion about like, where does that line, where do we cross that line? But I think there's such an intimidation factor for that, there's a barrier to entry for people to be creative because they feel like it has to be significant.
Right. And I think I've never had a problem with the creativity, but I just realized I needed to stop limiting myself across everything, not just art. I've mostly, another thing alongside this is that I have been doing lots of running and working towards running really long distances. And I worked on running this 35-mile race. I trained for it for like 2 years and started having like hip pain from overuse. We didn't know that at the time. And so I tried running like this goal, which is this is pretty close, like now that I can see it, a very close reflection to my art life. Like this big goal in the distance, you work on it for a very long time, the event happens, and then you start over. And so this happened with running in the last couple of years. I worked for 2 years to run this 35-mile race. I started running the race and I only got to 10 miles. And it was this huge, horrible failure feeling for me because I had this intense hip pain. And I learned that I needed to be cross-training. And so then I spent the last year really cross-training, like doing Zumba and weight classes and biking and just and running some, but not before. It was like 7 days a week, and now I'm running. I was thinking about it yesterday. I did like a long mountain run yesterday, and it was like the best run, even though I'm not doing it all the time. And I could just feel this strength in my body that I was a completely different body. And as I was running, I was like, this is just like with art. Like you had pigeonholed yourself into being like, I am a runner. And then I felt really uncomfortable that I had to do all this other training on the side. And then the other training on the side felt like it eclipsed the running. And I was running and I was like, maybe I'm just an athlete. Maybe I'm just an artist and I'm just an athlete, and get away from all those other labels. And
right, so you're not just a painter with all these auxiliary maker things, you're just an artist.
Yeah, and just like let the vision come. Like there's a vision, there's an idea, whatever I need to learn to make the vision happen works. Whatever I need to do to my body to just be an athlete works. It doesn't, if all that stuff helps the running, that's fantastic. And I think it's just a shift in, I guess, understanding myself, being okay with who I actually am, that instead of this idea of who I should be.
It's hard for maybe non-artists to understand that even artists go through that dilemma. It's sort of this arc of life that happens, whether we're professional artists or whether we're just regular people. But you kind of get to a certain stage of life passage where things just break open and there's a lot more permission. It's a word that keeps coming up in these conversations.
Yeah.
And was there sort of a particular event that was the permission, or was it just suddenly something that happened, percolated up through starting beating things or whatever,
Well, I mean, I would say in general, I mean, I do a lot of therapy. And so I've been doing therapy for like 4 years and EMDR. And I would say, like, not that we need to go into that, but...
Oh, I think we totally can.
Okay.
I mean, well, it's really another piece that's really related.
It's helped me a lot. So I think, like, accessing parts of my brain and really accepting things that have happened in my life, and I think that has changed who I am. And as it's taken a really long time, and I'm still working on it, but I think there's just something about that, like it's connected a lot of pieces of me, and I think I used to really feel fragmented in a way where I was across so many different pieces that were probably internal and then were reflected externally in how I experienced my life. And
sort of compartmentalized.
Yeah, I compartmentalized. Yeah. Uh-huh. And I think as I've learned why I do that and have undone that, I think it's making me be more of a whole person. And I'm not needing to do that anymore. So, I mean, it's kind of a weird thing to explain, but I guess it's just being like that, coming back to feeling okay with who I am, all the parts of me. And
well, the parts thing is really interesting. There's a kind of therapy that's called IFS, Internal Family Systems, which is all about integrating those parts of ourselves that kind of develop over the course of time, mostly when we're quite young, but they kind of keep coming up when we have these events that don't necessarily get integrated. So like this part kind of is created to address that kind of life situation.
Totally.
And I just flashed on this sort of amusing idea in my head of this dinner party scene that you're doing with all of the parts of you as components of this major installation that are all kind of permission to come together and be at the table together, literally be part of, one experience.
Yeah.
Even with the chaos that you're going to be building into it, which I think is kind of part of the permission piece, is to just let different elements to take over from time to time.
I think it is. And I think, I totally think it is. I mean, it's not intentional, but you can't, I can definitely see, like, go back through bodies of work and see, like, oh, this is where I was at in this year, and this is the kind of work I made. And I think you can't, like, they're not intended to be in any way, like, self-portraits, but they can't not be, because you're immersed. You are part of the work. I mean, even though the work is an object that's separate from you, you still made it. And I often feel like, okay, there's what I make in the studio, there's what I think about in the studio, and then there's it outside of the studio, and what is it now? And I think it doesn't always, just because I think it means one thing doesn't mean it is that one thing.
So have you met any of your collectors?
I have, yeah.
And so have you ever had an experience or a conversation where you put something out there, they responded to it, and then you got to have a subsequent conversation with them about what it means for them? And is that related to what it means for you, or do they bring something completely different to their experience of it?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think it depends. It really depends. I guess I'm always open to, I hope that what I make at least has some, if I have an idea of something and nobody got that from it at all, then that's not so good. I definitely missed what I was going for, but I feel open to other people. I mean, other people's interpretation is so much more interesting than what I think of. Oh, definitely. And so I love hearing what it is, and it's often slightly similar and then has some whole other narrative that's involved in their own life. And I always find that really fascinating. So I feel like then the work just gets to become like a conduit for connecting and having a dialogue and a conversation, and that's for sure where I want to go. And I don't want it to just be a beautiful object. I want it to be something that, invites discussion.
And when you're actually doing the work, speaking of conversation or dialogue, do you feel like the work is talking to you as you're working on it? Or is it something that it's like in your head and then you just do it?
I would say I start with an idea of, okay, I'm going to start with, and like with painting, I have images that kind of come up in my head, and I'll make a series of collages, and then I use that as reference, and then I'll depart from the collage and just start to work on it as an object. And I feel like I kind of start out as a technician, and then I'm having a dialogue with me in the painting or the place I'm trying to create. Especially with the paintings, I've often felt like I'm creating, and I think a lot of people feel this way, like I'm creating my own universe that I'm stepping into. And I want to show all these different views of like, what does this place look like in the ocean? What does it look like at nighttime? What does it look like when it's raining? And then I feel like the sculptures started being like, well, what kind of objects live here? And I think, I might have just lost track of what we were asking. What were you saying?
We were just talking about whether the paintings actually speak to you. So as you're working in the clay, does the creature do you have an idea? So you've got a turtle down there, you've got an alligator or a crocodile.
Right.
Right.
So the paintings seem like I have more of a technician idea in the beginning, and then it speaks to me. With clay and everything else, it's completely speaking to me. And I think that's part of why they're way more whimsical and fun and silly. Like it's completely, I sort of get an idea, but it's like, oh, maybe there'll be a bear. And then it goes from there. And for some reason, I don't judge or question it as much. And so it seems like now I'm really trying to give myself so much more permission in the painting. And I think that has to do with going to school. That's the only thing I can come up with why there's more barriers there. Is just having
the creativity educated out of you.
Yeah, it's definitely there. It's always been there, but just having so much, and it's so good, like having art history and having to have had critiques and, really speak for your art. But I have to speak for my art now. Like I have a big exhibition and I have to stand in front of critics and write artist statements. It's the same thing, but it's taken a long time to like just be more open-minded, and I think finding all these different avenues and then funneling back into painting and then letting the painting funnel it back into whatever installation. It's just trying to like have this internal conversation that's open. But I do think I try to do whatever I can. I have like systems in place that I know will let me get out of my own way quicker. And
what kind of systems? Say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, one is that like I try to get into the studio around the same time every day. I try to spend like the more time I'm in here, the quicker it is for me to get to the point where I'm just making decisions that I'm not criticizing. I'm just having fluid choices that I make. I think listening to music, listening to certain kinds of books, and those things like help me enter into that space in my brain. And I think that's part of the best part of creating is, and it's the same with exercise or running. Like there's a certain place I can get to where I stop being in the way and I don't really think anymore. I'm just acting. And that's probably like the best part of making.
So there's you do a lot of work that's actually very creative. Like when you're making a shape with clay, it becomes something.
Yeah.
And then there's another aspect to your work where you're embellishing a form that you've already created. So the shape and the form is already there, and you have millions maybe of beads here that you are painstakingly gluing, and they're from the size of a pea to smaller or a little bit bigger. So you've got this enormous bear that I'm looking at, and you've started to cover the head and the ears. That's going to take hours and hours of individual beads. So where does your mind go? Are you listening to music or a book on tape when you're doing that? Are you is the form still in telling you what to do? Do you know where you're going to put the colors?
It's still, yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I think with all of that, yeah, for each different kind of artwork, I kind of have a process that I end up starting with. Some are a little bit more comfortable than others. Clay, for some reason, is really easy for me to access that part where it's fluid. And I just kind of am like, oh, I'm going to make a frog. And then I look at an image of a frog for a little bit. And then suddenly, I don't know, it's like my hands just start seeing the frog in the clay. And then every now and then I'm like, well, I should probably look at the image again and see, is this where I want to be going? And then, embellishing it, like when I'm glazing with clay, that kind of goes back to painting for me, where I'll take photos of the sculpture and then I start coloring it in and make a bunch of different versions. And I fire a bunch of times, so I end up, the first glaze I do, the first round, is more like painting, where I have an idea of what it's going to be, but it never comes out exactly the way it should. So then I end up responding to it over and over like a painting. So like the first firing is really painful, and then I'm always disappointed. And I decided, like, if there's 85% of it I like, then I try not to cover it up, but then I just respond to it. So that's at least not answering the bead question, but that's the, like, clay question. Yeah. And so it becomes from object into painting. And then with the beading, that's really new for me. But, when I paint, I end up having times where I obsessively use tape and mark out all these tiny little areas. And also with clay, I started kind of obsessively one by one adding rhinestones with a toothpick. And I think the beading is definitely like the rhinestones with a toothpick. There's something really mesmerizing and peaceful, and it can be daunting if I think of it as the whole. And the bear I've ended up doing last. I've started with a lot of other objects that were smaller. I started first with a squirrel, and I would like thread each bead, like 10 beads on one pin, and that would take me like 8 hours. I would get like 3 inches done. And after I finished the squirrel, I was like, okay, I'm never going to finish any of these if I keep doing this method, although it was really satisfying. And as now that I've finally gotten to the bear, I think what I ended up having to do to just give myself a place to start is I made mock-up versions of at least colors that would work. Part of the thing that's been hard with this exhibition and specifically is I have to think of the whole show and all the pieces at the same time. And usually I think of, okay, I'm going to have paintings and I'm going to have sculptures, and they'll end up going together because I'll weed out what doesn't go together. I'll just make the work, then I'll figure out what the show's about. And I don't usually start with an idea of what the show is going to look like. And so I've constantly been struggling to be like, oh my gosh, is the table going to match the rug? Is the rug going to match the lamp?
It's like creating a symphony, really.
Yeah, and it's been really stressful, and I've made like 3 rugs already, and because the other 2 didn't work, I've made 4 sets of dishes because the color palette I thought would work, but it didn't, and the shape didn't work. And so as it's coming together, it's sort of like weeding out, it's making decisions for me, the whole body of work. So like with the bear, I finally got to this point where I was like, well, it can't be these 3 colors because that wouldn't go in any way with, like, it would just stand out in a horrible, I thought it was going to be bright orange bear originally, and orange and blue, but by the time I got to the bear, I was like, it can't be orange and blue, that there's no way it'll be cohesive, it'll be really confusing. So I at least could pare that down. So I have an idea of the color scheme, at least, that will make sense. And then in terms of like each individual bead, I end up mapping out all the, like, making color schemes. And at first, when I was first doing the beading, I would like look at each bead and decide what shape needed to go to next to.
Good Lord.
Yeah,
and just for our listeners, if you could see the number of objects that are being encrusted with beads, and for you to be painstakingly thinking about each bead, we're talking, hundreds of thousands of beads.
And it's been like
and it's not like it's being done in, a third world country with lots of little hands working, I mean, it's just...
Yeah, no, it's been painful.
All you doing this.
And I
it's
think
crazy.
I started realizing like that. So like the painstaking bead process, each bead was like decision fatigue. So recently what's been really helpful is to organize them all by color. They used to be organized by shape color. Now they're just organized by color, and I'll make like a bin of the color, and I just start being like, this area is going to be dark blue. And I'm not even looking at the beads anymore. I just have like the hot glue gun, and I'm like automatic.
So it's more like painting.
It's more like painting. It's become like painting. And then I'll be like, well, this is dark blue, but it needs some light blue. I better grab from this thing. And I'm not even... So it's become this fluid experience, but it took making like 3 objects painfully over months to finally get here where I'm like thinking about it like painting.
And so do you think about the wool? So I'm looking at this huge shelf of multicolored wool, and behind me is the enormous rug that you're working on. Is the process of the wool and applying color of wool the same as the beading?
It is. Yeah, I had to do the same thing. I started out with an idea, actually just like painting, where I made a collage. I didn't originally. Originally, I tried to make rugs that were just spontaneous, kind of like the clay, and that did not work. And I would get halfway done and be like, this is so ugly. And I'm like, well, of course it's ugly. You didn't plan it. You didn't do any planning in any way. And now you're stuck with this color over here. And you can't, I think because I come to everything from painting, I'm used to being able to erase and sand back and carve things away. And there's lots of, art forms, that's not how it works, so
it's a much more bigger commitment to do these other things.
Yeah. And you can't like removing something would, I did figure out with the rug a way to remove yarn. So that was helpful. But I ended up making a collage, multiple collages as a reference, and then departing from the collage. But I did end up thinking about it just like painting. So I started using all the tools more like a brush. And then I blocked in lots of color and then would evaluate it like a painting and take photographs and flip them upside down. And then I have tons of parts that I've done really small details like a painting. And it seems like with everything in the color part of it, if I just let my brain go back into painting language, then it's fine.
So speaking of back into your painting brain, is there a part of your brain that you've obviously learned how to manage that you quiet when you're starting like a new material or a new endeavor? What do you do with that part of you that says, what the heck are you doing? Like, what makes you think you can make a rug? What makes you think you can do this? How do you, that permission piece, like how do you quiet the critic? I guess it's the inner critic that I'm talking about.
Well, I'd say one thing is that anytime I shift what I'm doing, I end up cleaning my studio. And it's not on purpose, but it's like apparently a part of my process. I usually end up like reorganizing a whole area, and I organize everything by color anyway. So I think that kind of shifts my brain into like, well, this material is organized by color now, so everything's okay. like the thread organized by color, the yarn, the beads, and so it starts becoming just a tool. And I think that helps a little bit of my brain from the critic taking over. Also, just cleaning up the space, and I like having things put away at my house. I like things to be really minimal, and like if I could just have everything be away, like you don't see any objects or any clutter, like that's
which is just amazing to me because you've got 10,000 spools of thread. I'm sure it's not 10,000. It's just like a rainbow of color down there, and up here you've got the wool and you've got beads. I mean, it's anything but minimal.
No, it is. Like, yeah, I know, but then my home, I want it to be minimal, and so I think there's something about organizing things and putting away and having it all be categorized that like soothes some of that and helps the me focus, and then get closer into just working and not having the critic. But I do have the critic all the time. And it's over time, like in grad school, the first year of grad school, I would make a painting. Everything I painted over white. It was like the first year was horrible. I would like paint something, have a critique, paint over it white. That's all. So I didn't like barely made. You couldn't see anything by the end of the year that I made. It was all rejected, and I just had to make like a conscious decision. I couldn't do that anymore. And like, the other thing I used to do was I'd start glazing something in red, and every time I did that, that meant it was done. Like it was. So I've over time learned. There's this feeling I get when it's starting to, I mean, it really can be failing, or I'm just getting in the way and can't resolve it. And now I've learned that I have to make multiple objects at once. Like I'm making that beaded chandelier, and I've made one object, but I know I need to make like 2 others so that I don't put all the pressure on one piece.
To be the piece.
Yeah. Once I start thinking like that, then like the rug was so hard because I made 2 smaller ones. And as I was making them, it's like I've been able to. There's this feeling I get, and I start getting really antsy and angry, uncomfortable. Like I start going up and down. My studio has a ton of levels, and I start going up and down the stairs, not knowing what to work on. And I realize like, okay, I need to like go for a run, go do something else. There's like a point where I can't be making anymore because my brain's just getting too critical. And sometimes looking at other art in real life really helps. Although sometimes it doesn't, because then I just like judge that my stuff's never going to be good enough. So, or they did it better, you know. And so it's, I think like I've started to learn some of the like signs of the critic taking over. I mean, it could do it every day if I wanted, but I just try to think that I have lots of time. I have my whole life, and I can just do it again. Like,
well, that's a really amazing life lesson. I mean, you know, is very exportable to those to us non-artists. You know, I've got my whole life, however that's going to be, and I'll just do it again. I mean, slow down, give myself permission, or just give myself time to figure it out. If it's not coming through me right now, maybe change gears, go do something else.
Yeah.
And the pressure that we put on ourselves to sort of know how to do everything.
Yeah.
Always.
I guess I feel like I'm never gonna know how to do anything. And so
coming from a woman who has like accomplished so much, that's like,
I don't know.
Crazy.
Well, it's just like I just always feel like I'm a beginner and I need to learn more. And the quicker I can get to the failing part, the quicker I'll get to the next idea, which will hopefully be better. And I mean, it's the same with, like, I really think rejection's like a good thing. Like I apply to a lot of stuff, and I feel like whenever I'm rejected, I'm like, okay, what's the next thing? I have a whole list, and I just try to put that, like, whatever that yucky feeling is, just to be like, that's okay. It's not that it's the worst idea ever. Maybe it is, but I could probably, like, what can I learn from it, and how can I put that energy into something more productive? And so I guess same with, like, the object making, just like, that idea that I can do it again.
When you were a little girl, did you make things?
I did. Yeah.
So it's you just came out of the chute that way.
That's what I've been told. My mom tells me. I mean, lots of people are like that, but I didn't take it seriously for a long time. You know, like my mom now tells me all these things, like, oh, when you were little, you would sit in your back of the car, and she tells me this a lot, and it's like, I think what she says, it's something like, I have no memory of this. It's something like, I don't want to work like you guys. I just want to make art and people will buy it. And I was like, God, I said that when I was like 4. And she's like, oh, yeah. I was like, okay. And it took me, I mean, I didn't hear, you know, they've always been really supportive. When I did environmental science, they were like, why are you doing this? And, we didn't know about art schools. I didn't know about art high school. I didn't know about that I didn't know you could go to art school for a very long time. And as I've found that out over time, you have your path, and my path is really circular and weird and not in any straight line. And I think if I think about it, I always wanted to make things, but taking it seriously, taking myself seriously, feeling like what I had to say was valuable and that my voice was valuable has taken a long time.
That's huge.
Yeah.
Especially when, I know that we in New Mexico, Santa Fe especially, are surrounded by such incredible beauty. And sometimes the sky just puts on a show that you just, no painter, nothing could touch it. It's just absolutely sublime. And I know I've had the experience sometimes of looking out at natural beauty, and somebody like yourself who's been engaged in nature. And, do you ever just look at things around you and say, well, it's already been said by our natural surroundings? It's what more is there to say?
Yeah. I think I feel that way. I also think when I'm feeling bad, I'm like, oh, well, everything's already been done. And why is my version have any significance or importance? But I've just always had this drive that's like one of the most important things to me is just to make things and to work and I think part of it is being constantly flooded with images that, like, if I didn't get them out, I don't know what would happen. Like, I think that there's, all these weird little behaviors that get funneled into art making, like why I'm having to, like, I've been thinking a lot about, like, why is it that I'm having to, like, make these repetitive motions, like how am I finding, like, it's weird to me that I'm finding these places where I can have that much focus and intention on something that's repetitive, but I'm grateful that I can get it out here, and instead of somewhere else. Like, maybe we all have these ways that we need to do things, and they come out in our lives in different ways.
Well, it's like a metabolism. It feels like, you're taking things in and you're releasing things.
Yeah.
And it's kind of an artistic metabolic process.
Yeah. And I guess I feel like in that way, I don't know if that's important. It's more like a process that's going to happen no matter what. Like, I've always made things. They haven't always been seen. It doesn't always matter if they're going to be seen. I've had lots of times where there's whole bodies of work that were never seen. But I still am having the images and the drive to make it. And it's always been one of the most important things for me.
Have you ever had a bubble in the pipeline?
Where it doesn't work?
Where just like there's nothing coming through?
Not yet.
Yeah.
If anything, it's just like too much. Mm-hmm. So I'm constantly trying to, like, just calm it down. So, like, I have all these things in place to make sure I can go to sleep, because otherwise it's just
let's talk about that. How do you? Because actually one of the artists that I spoke to likened the creative process to, have you done any scuba diving? I haven't. So he was describing how when he was first learning how to scuba dive, they would actually take the tank off of you. Yeah. And as you were coming up, you had to keep exhaling, because if you didn't, you would explode. So and that it's counterintuitive because a sensation of exhaling seems like you feel like you need to inhale. But in the case of coming up to the top after having all that CO2 or whatever inside of you. So how do you turn it off when you need to sleep?
Well, at this point, exercise is like number one. I am my best self if I'm doing that. And the only hard thing is that it's because of, like, it's become more like about endurance. Like, now I have a high endurance, so I need it to be longer for it to work. and the good thing, and it's beneficial both in that I can sleep, and also I feel like I can access this really calm part of myself while I'm exercising, and everything feels like all the rough edges feel smoother. So that's definitely been one thing. And then I'm start trying to involve, like, meditation and things like that. That's definitely been off and on something I've done, but I know that I'm better if I make myself have, like, quiet time. And
so what's the experience of meditating like for you? I can't even imagine so how you get quiet with all this a constant incoming. And it's not like it's mental jabber like it's not monkey mind. I mean, what you're creating here is hardly what most of us experience as that mind chatter. This is genuine some source or something coming through you.
Yeah. I guess I just try to like see an image and then let it go and not like fixate on what that's going to be.
So that's interesting. So just letting it go. So it is kind of a
similar
form of exhaling in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and then there's also like, I have to read before I go to sleep. Like I just cannot fall asleep otherwise. And
what kind of things do you read?
I usually read, so like when I listen to, it's funny, like I listen to books a lot when I'm making things, but it can be anything. It doesn't have to be fantastic. Actually, if it's not fantastic, it's helpful because then I can miss some of the plot and it's not a big deal. But when I love to read, and when I'm actually reading words, I want it to be like really beautiful and captivating. So the only problem is if it's like really good, I have to be like, okay, I'm going to bed. But it helps me get out of my thinking, and I've done that my whole life. So I read before I go to sleep for a little while, and then I start thinking about some other narrative, and then that helps. And then if I'm falling asleep, sometimes still I can't fall asleep. Some things that help me are to like visualize like the most mundane things of the next day. So I start thinking, okay, what am I doing tomorrow? I'm gonna get up. I'm gonna put on my running clothes. I'm gonna make a cup of coffee. I start just like boringly going,
and you bore yourself to sleep
of my routine, and that often can help, and then the last resort is to think about. I have some calming places I can think of that are all outside, and if I let myself think of like, I have like a visual idea of like I've snorkeled a lot, so I start thinking about this one island in Thailand that I like. I can start thinking about that works. Or here, there's a lot of places that I like that I'll run late at night, and I can start thinking about that experience, and that'll help me go to sleep. So it's often like visual. So it's kind of a system like, exercise to being tired, then reading. So there's like another narrative going on, and then there's like a visual story. And then that usually can make it happen.
And then you have these spectacular dreams, I'm sure, at night. And then you wake up and you're like, there it is, more new ideas that you have to express again.
Yeah, totally. No, it's just like that. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and sometimes I just dream about what I'm doing. Like sometimes I'll be dreaming like that I'm in the studio and I'll solve the problem, and those are good.
Well, I can't wait to see what's next. So you've got the show coming up in Alabama.
Yeah.
You've got another show coming up in Denver, did I say?
Yeah, I have a group show in Denver in January, and then in February I have a solo show in New Orleans. And then I'm in a group show in New York in the summer.
So no end in sight.
No, but that's kind of how I work. I mean, I'm like, okay, well, what's happening in 2025 and 2026? I better get it going.
Well, I'd love to come back and see your next project.
Oh, I'd love that.
All right, great. Well, we'll end it there. And Thank you so much. So thanks for joining us today. Please like and follow us on artstorming.org, where you'll find a list of our shows, a transcript of this episode, with links to the guest page, as well as our other projects. ArtStorming is brought to you and supported by ArtBridge and listeners like you. Look for us on your favorite podcast platforms.